Hey, yeah. So, I've recently reached 3,000 subscribers, and this is a bit of a milestone for me. No, don't laugh. It really is. I think what I might do is it's customary to do a Q&A, but I usually answer all the questions and answers in the actual comments section, which is obviously a rookie mistake because you can turn that stuff into content. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to answer questions which I find myself asking myself, and then you can say any comments on the questions you would actually like answered below, and then maybe I'll do it in a later video rather than answering you in the comments section. How does that sound for a deal? Let's see how it goes. Anyway, so some things I've been thinking about. First of all, the future direction of my channel. Lol. Okay, so my channel is basically me just vlogging whatever goes into my skull brain that particular week, or whatever I've been working on. Sometimes it comes from conversations I've been having with other musicians, or something I've thought about on the way back from a gig, or just something I've been practicing, or something I've been thinking about, something I want to practice often, that gives me good reason to do it, all that kind of stuff. So it's not particularly planned out or anything like that. And from people who watch my channel, I think that's what they kind of like. So this brings me to the thorny question of whether or not I should set up a Patreon. And so far I've resisted it, because everything about going through the process of doing a Patreon is like, you must now think of yourself as a professional and you're doing something for your Patreons who will give you money. And it's like, ooh, I'm not sure about that. That sounds like somebody would expect something from me. I mean, they expect enough from me already, So the idea of people actually giving me money to do this is slightly terrifying from that point of view. But at the same time, I do sink a significant amount of effort into these videos, believe it or not. And they form part of my week, part of my working week now. So that's a question which I've been wrestling with a little bit. I'd be interested to know your thoughts. There's another question which somebody could have asked me, I don't know, they might have, which is, what do I think is the most important thing for a budding jazz guitarist to work on? And for me, I would say it's just getting all of the stuff together that you need to be able to get up and play a gig. And for me, this was always tunes. Just being able to play ahead, the melody of the song, being able to comp chords. It don't have to be anything fancy. None of this has to be to a high level, but it has to be, at the point where you can do it on stage under pressure. I don't know, the soloing, kind of, you don't tend to have to ask guitarists to work on soloing on the whole. They tend to do it. And usually actually the soloing's not too bad. You can say, oh, I don't really have any language, or I'd like to work on stuff more. And it's like, yeah, sure. But really, the focus of anybody's playing life is going to be playing with other people, whether that's in gigs or workshops, or jam sessions, for instance. So you need a certain skill set to be up there. And certainly guitarists who comp well are always going to get gigs above guitarists who can solo well, Like, the best guitarist, jazz guitarist in the world that I can think of off the top of my head, let's say people like Peter Bernstein, right? Lage Lund, Pasquale Grasso, who else is amazing on the scene? Mike Marino, the list could go on. Plus anybody in the UK who you think of as being really good, Jim Mullen. Now, Jim Mullen said to me that the reason why he got into jazz guitar was to comp, because none of the jazz guitarists he knew could comp like McCoy Tyner style, and that was his main reason for getting into it. So that's quite interesting, and certainly all the other players that I think of on the scene at the moment, including people like, Nigel Price, and loads of great players who probably people who aren't in London might not have heard of, That's a convoluted construction. Anyway, you get the idea. Certainly, and any of the players I know are working. Like they all comp really well. I would say my own bread and butter is the fact that I can play good straight fours. Like swing style straight fours, and I know lots of those old tunes. So even though it's not necessarily the sort of thing that I would like to necessarily do all the time, I have that skill set and I get booked to do it, and usually the gigs pay all right. So that's a skill set which I have. I feel like a jazz guitarist in the 1940s. I'm sure like they all had the same thing. It's like they're all doing the comping thing and they're going like really I want to play like Charlie Christian, whatever. But that's your bread and butter, and jazz is as much about that as it is about soloing and shredding your head off or whatever. So I definitely say that like learning tunes and learning how to comp. And learning the melodies of tunes is important. I didn't realise this until depressingly recently. Like learning the melodies of tunes is really important so that you can comp behind the tune better. If you don't know the melody, then you're you're all sixes and sevens about which chord voicings to use and everything else. So that's really important as well, I think. People who just concentrate on soloing become bedroom guitarists, in my opinion. And while being a bedroom guitarist is actually probably not such a bad career path at the moment due to the existence of YouTube, it does mean that you don't tend to play with other people so much. And I do see some very talented soloists out there, but they don't seem to be doing any gigs. They're just sort of there doing clinics and out there in the YouTube world. And I mean, they don't seem to be unhappy exactly. But then I think if I didn't, have that social interaction with other musicians playing music on stage and hanging out, then I don't know. I just like the hang, and I just like to play music with other people. That to me is what jazz is. Anyway, here's another non-question. Actually, no, I was asked this question, which is, what do you think of all the Simon Fransman made a very funny and very dismissive video about this, but that there's been a big kind of hype about jazz musicians from Southeast London, and particularly bands like Ezra Collective and so on, and Nubia Garcia, and Moses Boyd, people like that. And it's been a big hype, and to be honest with you, it's kind of passed me by a bit because A, I'm a bit too old, and B, it's like I've got a situation in my life now where I don't sort of go out to as many gigs. So I feel like this is kind of happening in a separate sphere. I played with some of the people involved in that scene, and they're all great musicians. But like I don't really feel like I've kind of been around that sort of world enough to sort of really comment on it. What I would say is that I think the jazz scene in London is probably the best it's been. And I don't say that lightly. That's actually something which comes from older musicians who said it. I mean, any kind of jazz you want to find here is now well represented. If you want to find straight ahead jazz guitarists, there's loads of those. If you want to find modern fusion people, there's loads of those. If you want to find sort of post Rosenwinkel star players, there's loads of those. And that's just the guitarists, right? So what you're seeing from that particular, dare I say, a hype train is just a small cross section of what is now a very, very healthy scene in London. And it's not New York yet, but it's a lot better than it was, and it's getting better all the time. And I think that's pretty exciting. And actually, I find that as a player, I'm doing lots of fun gigs, and there's gigs full of like younger people and enthusiastic people as well who enjoy music, and it can only be a great thing. So here's a question which I get asked a lot, which is could you do tabs? And I have done them sometimes. I've done tabs and music and stuff like that, but it's a difficult one. First of all, the main factor is time. Do I have enough time to do this? I try to keep my upload schedule reasonably regular, so if I don't have much time that particular week, I probably won't get around to doing tabs or transcriptions. I mean, in terms of transcribing my own stuff when I play it, it's really flattering that you would want to play the notes that I play, but to be honest with you, I can't remember how it goes, and it would take me just as long to tab that out as a an actually good solo by somebody like Wes Montgomery or somebody. So it's like, why would I waste that time? The other thing is, of course, I actually do think that sometimes people get too obsessed with the actuality of playing, the the materials of it rather than the process. So what I've always tried to do in my channel is show the process of how I think about something. So this might be a bit inaccessible to people who, you know, at a certain level of learning where they need to be told what to play, and you know that's understandable. But hopefully for people who are looking for ideas, they can watch maybe just a bit of my video and go, oh, that's a cool idea, I'll try that, you know. In which case, that's great. And I think a lot of the people I actually meet people in real life who watch these videos, which never fails to amaze me, because it just shows what a small world, given my subscriber figures, it shows what a small world jazz guitar really is. But I think often the things they tell me are similar to that. It's like, oh yeah, I watched that video, and that kind of gave me inspiration for doing that. That's amazing. You know, that's like far more than I was expecting when I started just vlogging my brain contents onto YouTube for no really good reason. You know, so that's great. So I'm in tabs and things like I feel like, you know, like a few months back I did a Chico Pinheiro composition, and I did tabs for that. So I just felt it was, you know, appropriate to do so. And then I had like a Peter Bernstein mix that I transcribed, so I did that. That's the sort of thing that Jens does really well. But the thing I would say as well is that transcription. And this is a great comment by Hal Galper, who you know I've mentioned a few times on his channel, is itself like listening, working out music is itself a creative act, because you're expressing your own personal tastes. Now, I could listen to a Kurt Rosenwinkel solo or whatever and pick out licks which are completely different to the ones that appeal to your ear, and that's great. Because like if I have, you know, even if we both only listen to Kurt Rosenwinkel, we could both end up sounding completely different. Because you have your Kurt licks and I have my, you know, sorry, I have my Kurt licks and you have your Kurt licks, getting confused with the gestures there. But, you know, it's like you have your own battery of reference points, and those reference points are guided by your own intrinsic aesthetic sense. Sorry if you forgive the expression. So it's like, if you have that, then nobody can tell you what to play because you've got your own thing, you know. And then, of course, that develops into your own style. It's like, you know, all the people who, you know, have learnt from Django Reinhardt over the years, who've listened to Django Reinhardt's music and transcribed, you know, all the gypsy players, the gypsy style players, you know, none of them sound exactly alike. They all have a different take on it. Apart from Duved, what's his face? He sounds exactly like Django Reinhardt, but that's another story. It's like, it just goes to show, I think, the variety in human creativity, even when you're doing something which is quite specific, like, for instance, you know, playing gypsy jazz or bebop or blues guitar, say, you know, or whatever it is. There's still variety and creativity within that. And of course, if you're listening eclectically to lots of different music, your style might end up being very eclectic indeed, which is, I think, in the end, you know, despite the fact that most of my videos here are about bebop, that's kind of my own personal preference. I mean, I'm listening to all sorts of stuff. Actually, that brings me on to the next question, which would be, what are you listening to at the moment? And I've actually been listening mostly to contemporary jazz recently. Been listening to a lot of Tigran Hamasyan. That one managed to slip me by. And, you know, a fair amount of contemporary piano trio stuff, Brad Meldo's last album, stuff like that. I think I'm listening more to non-guitarists because I find them just a bit more progressive. Donny McCaslin Quartet, sorry, as well. I find like that there's more going on there, which is looking forwards. I think jazz guitarists have this horrendous thing where you feel you have to mark yourself out from being a rock guitarist. I think it's a really deep thing. It's not so much a problem if you're a straight head player like Peter Bernstein. You know, Peter plays straight head jazz and that's his thing, and he does it best in the world, in my opinion. You know, but on the other hand, you have like that whole sort of thing where, you know, you're playing in a contemporary jazz project and it's like, you know, am I Jimi Hendrix or Jim Hall, or am I Johnny Greenwood, or am I, you know, Steve Vai? Who am I? You know, what am I doing here? You know, and for a guitarist, I think that's an interesting challenge, and I think the only person who managed to shake that up a bit over the past 20 years, of course, Kurt Rosenwinkel, who kind of had his own rock-inflected sound, still does, you know, although it's changed a bit. But lots of people have sort of followed along in that kind of train, but there's still that sort of fundamental like thing of like, you know, what's my thing? And I think maybe with the younger generation, they're starting to think less along those lines, because a lot of the younger players sound like You know, they could easily just be rock players or fusion players. There's less of a kind of grounding in sort of traditional bebop guitar there. But then that's not necessarily a bad thing. But on the other hand, like the textural thing very much interests me. And with all this technology we got now, you know, we could be doing kind of like interesting stuff that's almost electronic. We don't have to be limited to playing lines or you know, or traditional chords even. You know, it seems strange to me that Bill Frisell is still kind of seems very innovative to me. You know, even though he's, you know, a couple of generations older now than the younger players coming through. I feel a lot of the younger players are still very wedded to that idea of the guitar being the guitar, you know, and I feel like it's less true of bass players, keyboardists, even drummers like Mark Juliano. Mark Juliano sort of preparing the drum kit to get more electronic sounds out of it. Anyway, you might think that's absolute rubbish, and please feel free to post any hate comments below. Thanks for listening. Bye.